Welcome. For those of you who I've not met, my name is David Reyes, and I'm the Dean of the School of Nursing and Healthcare Leadership. It's really wonderful to see all of you here at UW-Tacoma to help us begin a new tradition for us, which is this inaugural Healthcare Symposium. Our theme is one that we have thought about, and actually I will say, I was talking to someone that this has been sort of an idea in gestation for over a year. And while I'm not a parent, I can only imagine what it means when you actually have something that comes into the world and now it's your baby and you just want to take care of it and celebrate it. And that's also what part of today is for all of us and for me as we think about what's happening within our current environment around healthcare. And the theme that we have for today, which is transforming healthcare through agency, advocacy, and equity. And those words were chosen not haphazardly, but to really reflect what's happening in our current environment in the world and in our country as we think about the status of health and wellness, not only locally, but certainly globally. And there are a lot of things happening around the world that really are shaping the way in which we think about health, how we act toward it, how we behave toward it. I want to also just acknowledge that you all as a group of folks, as leaders, clinicians, students, scholars, partners, coming together because I think we all deeply care about healthcare, whether that's individually, with our families, collectively, and that each of us plays a role in making that happen, and hopefully in a better way. In my own role as dean, moments like this remind me that none of this work happens in isolation. It really depends on our willingness to learn from and with each other. We are really at a pivotal moment. Healthcare is being transformed in real time by technology, by evolving systems, by political forces, and by very real human need. There's a lot of opportunity in that too, and also some real tension. So today's event is not just about ideas, but it's about learning. It's about thinking across perspectives, thinking together, and how can we actually move forward in a way that brings meaning and thoughtfulness, grounds us in connection, and also really achieves what we hope, which is an equitable health system. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge where we are. I'm not going to recite our UW-Tacoma land acknowledgement, but offer my own words on this, which, as we all know, we are all in the ancestral land of the Coast Salish peoples, and here particularly the Puyallup tribe. At UW-Tacoma, we recognize that this is just not a statement to open an event, but it's something that should carry meaning. Beyond land acknowledgements, if we're honest, can become routine, and they shouldn't be. For me, this is really an invitation to all of us, an invitation to think about our own responsibility, both individually and collectively, to show up in ways that are authentic, respectful, and grounded in action. It's a reminder that reciprocity matters, that we have a role in building relationships with our Indigenous partners in ways that honor sovereignty, uphold community voice, and respect the deep knowledge and care that has sustained this land since time immemorial. So as we begin today, I invite us to hold that with us, not just in words, but in how we listen, how we engage, and how we think about the work ahead. I thank you for being here and for being part of this conversation. To ground us, we'd like to start with an audience activity. So this is I'm an educator, many of us, so we want to work with each other, we want to be involved, and so we're going to engage you in an activity here, and we're going to ask you to, if you have your device out, is to scan this QR code. We're going to do a little Slido, for those of you Slido, and in one word, to think about what comes to mind when you think about the challenges we face about health. Okay, so we'll give you a couple minutes there. And I know the temptation will be to abbreviate words and hyphenate them so they're one word, but really think about one word. Okay. So in time, you can see what the thoughts are in the room with each other about what it is that we think about when we talk about healthcare. Some of the usual words are there: access, right? We all need to get it. Cost, advocacy, affordability, community, it's broken, it's inequitable. These are all real descriptors, right? And there are as many definitions of health as there are people in this room and outside of this room. We all experience it differently. We all interact with it differently. But we hold and hope that we actually achieve the same thing, which is to be healthy. So now we're going to ask you to think about another question, which is, what is one word that describes what gives you hope when you think about the future of our health? The youth, education, discovery, resilience, science, election, community, innovation, compassion, resilience. It's heartening to see community at the center, because that's what we're all about, right? Whether we're a community in this room, we go home to our communities, we work in communities, and that's the heart of it, right? Compassion. Compassion is a value in how we work with community. And yet we know that there's a lot of forces around us that get in the way. But the hope that we can change that, that's really what this is about. And we all have ways in which we might think about how we act compassionately, how we engage with the community, how we use our voice through elections, through our knowledge, through the science, and how do we rebound from what's happening now, right? So I want to thank you for that, because this really is about trying to figure out, what is this thing we call health? What is it that we're trying to achieve, understanding there are many forces around us? And how is it that we can act in ways that change it, not just for ourselves, but for our families, for our communities? And how is that we can make a difference, not just at an individual level, but at the community and the systems level? Because we know that even though when we think about health, we think about access, whether it's going for care, but we also, that access is actually not a prime factor in actually being healthy, right? It's the other things: access to education, access to a living wage, access to housing, access to food, right? So access also can mean different things, not just access to healthcare. So thank you for participating. There'll be another chance for you to participate a little bit later, but this time I'm going to invite our panelists to come to the stage, and we're going to start a conversation with you. So as our panelists are coming to the stage, we'd like you just to sort of think about the place that you occupy, the place that you come from, as you think about those challenges that you see in the system, but also the hope. Listen for that in the conversation. That's going to be part of what I'm going to ask you to do, is to have a bit of that conversation as well. Our panelists today are some amazing people, some that I have known for a long time, some that I've just gotten to know, and I will just say that in planning this symposium, the chance to talk with each one of them individually and together has really made me be excited for what they're going to share from their perspectives about this thing that we call health, and how is it that we can approach it and change it and make it better. Second to my right here, Dr. Suha Balut. She's an associate professor, and she's associate dean for diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging at UW Seattle School of Nursing. She's internationally recognized nurse scholar and researcher and educator whose work examines how social, structural, and political conditions shape health, healthcare delivery, and the education of the nursing workforce. Patty Hayes is an alumna of UW School of Nursing, a double Husky, always wearing purple and gold. And she is a renowned nurse leader who I've known for many years, with over 35 years of public health and policy experience, and she currently serves as chair of the Washington State Board of Health. Among her leadership roles, Patty has also served as the director of Department of Public Health, Seattle and King County, where I knew and worked with her. And I would say the only nurse who's actually been the director of a major metropolitan health department. And she also served as assistant secretary for the Washington State Department of Health's Community Family Health Division. She's also a recipient of the MLK Service Award from King County. Dr. Nora Kenworthy, who is a professor at UW Bothell School of Nursing and Health Studies, and she is a 2025 Andrew Carnegie Fellow exploring polarization and solidarity in digital environments for health in the U.S. And she's the author of a book which I would recommend reading. I've had an enjoyable time reading. It's called Crowded Out, a work that looks at how technology, politics, and charity impact health, and if I might say, through crowdsourcing. So it's a very interesting perspective that Nora will bring. And then Jan Marie Ward, a lineal descendant of Santa Ynez and Barbareno, California Mission Indians. She is the principal of 7 Generation Strategies and serves as the senior public policy and project advisor and consultant to the American Indian Health Commission, and is also serving on the Governor's Interagency Council on Health Disparities. She's a past president of the Washington State Public Health Association, whose leadership and commitment to equity and social justice through trauma-informed systems and practices has really shaped her leadership to really change the systems to improve health and wellness for American Indian and Native Alaskan and BIPOC communities. So join me in welcoming our esteemed panel. And I'm going to move over to the middle here. So for today, we're going to start with sort of a general question. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to speak to it from their own experience and to invite their reflections, and as you listen, for you to reflect as well. And I'm going to start with Jan Marie. Your work is, I would say, is from what I have known of you, has been really deep in community and in tradition and culture. And for you, just thinking about that and through your work in public policy and Indigenous health advocacy, what feels most urgent and unresolved in creating these systems that you've been really working through, particularly through trauma-informed approaches, from your lens, from your experience? And how is it that we can truly center community, voice, and sovereignty and equity? Turns red.
There you go. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you, and thank you, David, for the invitation and to sit here with my esteemed colleagues. I feel very fortunate to do that, so I just wanted to open with that. First of all, I would say it's important to acknowledge that tribes, the original people of this continent, have inherent sovereignty. And inherent sovereignty means that it was based upon their relationship to the land and all of their relations on the land with each other, families, generation upon generation, through their own systems and structures that were established through their relationship to all of the plants, the animals, even the weather conditions that was inherent in their relationships long existed before the founding of the United States. One of the first policies that the settlers brought in was in 1619, and they established that Indians, mulattoes, which are mixed race, and Negroes, their term, were established as real estate. So that did not result in a very good start in terms of where we are. And we're still dealing with some of those, the implications of what that meant, right? Even though the laws have been changed. In 1924, American Indians, there was an American Indian legislation, an act that was signed into law establishing American Indians as citizens of the United States. 1924. A long time had passed between 1619 and 1924. So I start with this. People cannot be healthy in isolation of their communities, their cultures, their histories, and their lands. Healing is relational, intergenerational, and spiritual, as well as physical. The communities carrying the greatest burden of historical harm deserve systems built around their own wisdom, values, and community needs. We have to talk about historical trauma and intergenerational transmission of trauma. The ACEs study brought a great deal of understanding to the public health field. And what was missing, however, was that was just based upon a very narrow group. It didn't go into the conversation about root causes of certain populations. That's really important work. Now I'm going to jump to a couple of things, David. Right now, a few things that I'd like to emphasize are American Indian Alaska Native women have the highest maternal mortality rates in the country. And then when you look at those maternal mortality rates, the other groups most impacted are Black women and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders. This is a crisis in our country. And when you look at it globally, again, it's a crisis in our nation. The other thing I want to just raise is that if we had policies that were about the protection of our children, the safety, the health, the well-being, and the cultivation of brilliance in children, we would be a lot further along than we are now. There's where I think we need to bring a lot of energy to.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn to Suha. And your work has not only been here in the U.S., it's been internationally and from your country of origin. And so you bring a perspective of globalism to your current work as an educator, as doing the work in terms of diversity. So from your work examining and thinking about those social structures, and you've seen different ones here and abroad, when you think about that work around social and structural forces that are shaping health and healthcare delivery, what strikes you? What is out there that says, we got to think about this differently? What's the pressing need that you see for us to really address?
Thank you for a very easy question.
And to advance equity.
Well, thank you, David, for inviting me to be part of this wonderful panel. Jean-Marie, it's going to be hard to follow you. But, it all starts for me when I was thinking and preparing some of the notes and trying to see how can I think about, what are the sparks. It brings me back to when I was a new nurse, maybe back in 2001. Sorry, I'm a storyteller a little bit. I was on a med-surg unit working. I was in Beirut, Lebanon, where I went to nursing school, grew up there. And it was an American University of Beirut Medical Center, followed a lot of the Joint Commission International standards. We assumed that was, the highest standard, evidence-based practice. And then we received a patient who was born male coming in for top surgery. And for some reason, for healthcare professionals and nurses in the room, there's always that one patient, maybe many, but that one patient that kind of helps you think about things differently. And healthcare for that patient was very different. The amount of healthcare professionals who were visiting that patient was a lot more. But it wasn't because they were taking care of the patient medically. It was more about treating the patient as Exhibit A. The conversations about who can take care of that patient or not and what can we call the patient, were things that I did not learn about in school. I did not know what to do. It had that feeling that something was wrong, but I didn't have the language. The voices, the tone, the eye contact from the healthcare professionals, it was a surprise. And as a new nurse who's trying to learn and look and absorb everything, that was a moment where, and I was a young new nurse, so I did not know what to do. And so it really, I didn't have the work that I have right now to kind of understand and see what was happening, but it was something that made me feel like I need to be doing something among others. And I kept asking questions to the senior nurses, and nobody could realize or answer that I saw something was different. And it wasn't the only instance. There were so many similar instances with patients with that shared gender and sexual identities into our institution. And so I felt like I needed to do something, and I had no idea back then that I would be among many people who had something to do with that work. And it was a very proud moment. In 2021, when I led an organization, the Lebanese Medical Association for Sexual Health, we called LebMash. And we had many initiatives, and one of the initiatives was really we were funded by a foundation to really look at conversion practices. Those practices that have become, at that time, very prominent. Many of them were experts or people calling themselves experts from the US going to other countries like the Middle East and coming to Lebanon, making all these seminars trying to convince parents, school nurses, and others about these camps that they created for trying to fix people who had a gender identity that was different than the identity they were born in or labeled with. And so these efforts really were harmful, and so we were able to run a nationwide project that ended up spilling over and kind of adopted in other countries in the Middle East. And when we're talking about, families with LGBTQ members in a country where same-sex relationships are criminalized, that becomes a very big conversation, a lot bigger than we can imagine, but also it's a country where there is political instability, so we learned that we cannot put anything on the table because the government doesn't meet often, and when they do, they have bigger what they label as bigger conversations to deal with, but conversations related to safety and livelihood. And so this work really was very professionally rewarding for me because we learned how to advance policy in ways when the government wasn't around. And I feel like now being here, and I'm not saying on the record that government is not around, but it is very hard to put policy on the table. How can we think about what we called back then as microbans to try to think about where are the issues happening and where can we advance them? And then, yes, this was a 20-year arc from that first moment, but I felt like this is an example of transformation can happen. It might be slow. A lot of people did not receive the care they needed in the meantime, and I'm not saying things are fixed right now, but it really helps us see how over time we can do something. We just have to have a little bit more patience than we assume. And many of us can think of that one patient, one moment to really think about, things could have been different and what could I do? And I feel like I take that question over. And I'm glad Jean-Marie brought that maternal mortality because every time you talk about this, and maybe because personally I'm a woman, I look at this and you are right. These are issues that we deal with, and this is not only local. We've dealt with it back in the Middle East as well. And we've done a lot of work. But, the evidence has not changed. But, David, as you and I and a group of faculty here were talking just last week, is that what has changed is that we had the backing in nursing of a lot of our associations and what we can and cannot do. But now we just had, again, 2 weeks ago, the release of a change in our nursing essentials that really tells us what every nursing school must teach as part of our accreditation. And there was that substantive change without the regular process of mentorship vote and without any published rationale. There was that swap of removing all DEI language, all language that really talks about health equity, and trying to understand the root causes and the structural systems of what we can do. So that is really an issue. First, it's an issue for all those who put the effort to make the changes needed, but also to think about, our graduates. They're going to graduate not learning the root causes of all these issues. We're going to still talk about them as statistics, but not really be trained to think about what would that mean. So, the student will learn in curricula that will not talk about those structural racism issues because the word racism and everything related to it was removed as a mandate. It is kept to us as schools. Like I know at UW we had a conversation that we're not going to make the changes. We're going to stay true to our mission, and we're in a state that allows that. And so are some other states. But there are other states that their graduates and nurses who will practice in this country and maybe globally will not learn about the origin of why issues are happening. And the next cohort of clinicians also will be working without knowing how patient outcomes could be changed by looking at social and structural determinants of health. And also as educators, we're going to make decisions on how and what to teach, and what do we do when these standards retreat and kind of don't allow us to keep pushing forward? So there's a lot that I could talk about.
It's striking as I listen to you and just having heard from Jean-Marie, when we think about context and how when we think about people who are different and how we otherize that. And we really have to ask the question, or maybe just point out the fact that we haven't stopped doing that, right? Each time somebody looks different, acts different, we start to say they're other. And so therefore they're not in quote entitled or they don't have the resources to be not otherized. Right? And the fact that in this country that maternal and infant mortality hasn't changed significantly in decades. We're still in the bottom third when we look globally. So, we have to ask ourselves, what is happening? What haven't we done differently? And that is structurally. They're about policies. Despite all the technology that we have, and I'm going to turn to Nora here in a second, but we spend more per capita on individuals in healthcare than any other comparable economic country. And yet our health outcomes still remain low, poor, and we keep throwing more money at something that isn't working. So the question is, what's going to work? What do we have to actually fundamentally shift, not only in terms of technology, but in the way in which we shape the system, right? And to your point, Suha, how are we being educated as part of the workforce? And how do we stand up for the values that we know are really important within our fields? And how are we actually advocating and really changing so that everybody has the chance and here is the equal chance to be healthy? So Nora, you've done work around the technology space, and just wanted to ask you then too, when you think about this intersection of politics and technology and inequality that's shaping the system healthcare, and what is urgent and resolved for you? Where do you see the opportunities for transformation?
Can everyone hear me? Well, how much time do you have? First of all, thank you so much for having me. I feel really honored to be part of this very esteemed group of people, and really lovely to be with all of you in community. I actually want to pick up on a really lovely point that Jean-Marie made about how we can't have health in isolation, and talk a bit about how polarization and isolation and technology are related. And let me start a little bit by, I first want to just acknowledge all the word cloud stuff that came into the room with us, which is a lot. It's really hard to kind of pick your fighter these days, right? And we could have a whole symposium on many of those words, and we probably should, but poor David has other things to do with his life. But instead of kind of picking up one of those things, I want to try and identify as what I see as a sort of central thread that runs through all of this. And I think the hope here is that when you find that thread, sometimes you can start to unravel things, much the way you can kind of unravel knitting projects, sometimes unintentionally by pulling on those threads. So just a little bit about how I come into this work. So my work really sits at the intersection of public health and politics. It's a really fun place to be right now. And I've spent a lot of my work life thinking about how societies politically engage with health systems, and also how health interventions change us as political creatures. And then for about the last decade or so, I've been thinking about how everyday digital technologies kind of get into that mix. And I'm not really talking about clinical technologies, but more about the technologies we carry around in our pockets, technologies like Facebook and Google and GoFundMe, and how those shape the way that we approach and understand and access healthcare. Right now, though, I'm doing a project that really focuses on polarization and digital societies and our health. So I want to start there. We all know that we are profoundly politically polarized as a society right now. We have ample evidence of that. But rarely in our history has health been so central to our polarization. Health is highly politicized across a lot of different topics and domains, whether we're talking about vaccines or nutrition or fluoridation or health coverage or trans healthcare or maternal healthcare. And we're increasingly not just not seeing eye to eye with other people on these issues, but it feels like increasingly we're on different planets. So right now, I am interviewing Republicans and Democrats and independents across the United States to talk to them about their health beliefs and values and how they think about community health in this time. And I find this fascinating. Many people across the political spectrum say that they can identify another person's political beliefs and identity based solely on their health behaviors and choices. And that phenomenon became a lot more prominent during the pandemic when these very visible signs of our health beliefs, like masking, really became markers of political identity as well. But people in my groups also talk about severing and losing relationships with family, close friends, church communities, due to those differences in health beliefs and due to huge gaps in how they perceive information in science and health. Those are real pain points for our society. And I know we're seeing it show up in our classroom spaces and our clinical spaces as well. And I think also a lot of this has to do with long histories of racialized trauma, right, of racialized exclusion within our communities. These are very deeply historically embedded phenomena. But here's the kind of silver lining on a lot of this. As a species, and particularly as a society right now, we tend to over-focus on what divides us and where our differences are, and under-focus on where we have shared values and common grounds. And research bears that out. And what's also interesting is that the more we care about these things, the more polarized we think they are to our deficit. So let's maybe do an exercise with vaccine beliefs for a second. I'm not going to ask what people's vaccine beliefs are in this room, but obviously childhood vaccine mandates are one of the most polarizing political topics that a lot of us are encountering in health right now. And the idea here is that many Americans oppose the idea of mandating children to get vaccines in order to attend school, with small exceptions for religious beliefs and health exceptions. So if I had to ask all of you where the kind of political split is on this issue in the United States, how many of you would say that about 50% of Americans oppose childhood vaccine mandates? No one. How about 40%? 30? Okay. 20? Yeah, it's less than 20%, which is not great, right? That's still bad. But it's a lot less than most people perceive it to be. Even if you take, for example, Republican parents in Florida, or if you take MAGA Republicans, approximately 3/4 of them support vaccine mandates for children. So oftentimes we're hyper-focused on the difference, and we're not really focused on where our areas of commonality are. And these are the issues that really divide us, right? If you walk around and ask people about how much do you feel like your healthcare is unaffordable, or how much do you feel like your health system doesn't serve you, the vast majority of people agree. And so these trends of isolation, of division, are in many ways influenced by our digital environments. Our digital environments provide us with innovations in healthcare, they provide us with community, they provide us with all kinds of connection and support, and also we are steeped in pretty relentless diets of information that is one-sided and polarizing and oftentimes just flat out wrong. And that's all of us. It's not just the other guys who experience that, right? I was looking at the word cloud that we put up at the beginning, and I saw words like selfishness and greed and lack of community, division. So much of that is really reflected back to us in our digital environments, but our digital environments also tend to isolate us. A lot of tech experts now talk about something like AI is actually a technology of isolation. And I think we're gonna get into that a little bit. But I think the answer to both of these challenges, or these interrelated challenges, is to really deepen our human connections to each other, to begin seeing that as the core work of health that we do. And I know we don't always see that as part of the health worker's role or the health system's role. But at its heart, effective public health policy or community health intervention depends on mobilizing people to act in solidarity and care about others. And we have largely failed to do that in a lot of respects. And so how can we foster, build, and preserve community solidarity when it comes to health in these highly polarized contexts? And how can we leverage technology to help us do that? Those are really kind of the questions that are driving my work right now. Thank you.
So Patty, wow. you get to follow that. You're in a unique place as chair of the Board of Health, because part of your role is looking at the state, right? That's a lot of weight on the shoulders in some ways. But you also have a perspective from understanding or knowing what is, from your years of leadership and policy work, how to navigate that. You've seen cycles of change and cycles of division and not enough funding, et cetera. So part of my question, which relates to this, is, so what's different now, if it is, or isn't it? What's pressing now, and is that the same as what was pressing then?
So David just changed my question.
Well,
from
you
what
can
he
still have the
told
same
me.
question. But it's all about systems,
Now,
all about systems.
He knows I'm very flexible. That's why. And
So
I
this is the
appreciate the
conversation.
opportunity to make this up lifetime and not use my notes.
Yeah, you can use your notes.
It's fine. That's such an intriguing question, and this has been fabulous with bringing us together, but just listening to you guys is just a real honor. And I'm so glad you're here, because we need these conversations. We need you to think about these things. So things do go in cycles. I mean, that's a very true fact that I've found over time. The cycles are different, and I think that we've noted some things that make now different. One of the things that came out a number of years ago in some of the popular literature was technology was advancing so fast that it was going faster than the human being can accommodate to it. And now we're in this place where technology, quantum computers are emerging. Pretty soon they're going to stabilize it, so that leap will be amazing. There's a wonderful book, if you like sort of popular, interesting astrophysics literature, by Dr. Mikio Keiko, who has written a book called Quantum Supremacy that talks about when quantum computer, it doesn't have any math in it, so don't worry about that part. You can read it. I love this book because he talks about what's going to happen when we take this leap into quantum computing. What is it going to mean for AI? What's it going to mean for healthcare? The chapter on healthcare alone would be worthy of you all reading it because it was fascinating, and it will give you the vision of where healthcare needs to evolve, where public health needs to evolve, and also what clinicians are going to be facing as we make more and more change go so fast. So I think that's one thing that's different now is change is so fast. It's hard today and tomorrow for it to feel stable. One of the other things that was really a failure during COVID that I actually spent a huge amount of my time doing was messaging to people that what I'm saying today will change tomorrow because we will learn something new about this virus. And if you look at the national debate right now and a lot of the polarization around this, it's now saying that we should have known, blah, 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 lots of information. Public Health Seattle King County on the hantavirus problem that's emerged from the cruise ship, and it actually had nothing to do with the cruise ship, it just so happened to be a cruise ship. It was these people that went out into an Argentinian landfill that had these mice, contracted the hantavirus of the Andes version and brought it onto the cruise ship. So even there's a myth going on that it somehow was a cruise ship, just so happened that they went on the cruise. But so we're faced with really interesting times right now. But Public Health Seattle King County took the moment yesterday in their interaction with the media, and if you get a chance, it's, again, an excellent risk communications moment there, where they led with a compassionate, I know this could make everyone feel nervous because it feels like what we experienced before, but I'm here to tell you we know about this virus. We didn't know about that virus. I can tell you how this virus works. They did a brilliant job. So I think part of the challenge right now is finding that way to communicate and actually over-communicate it. Because how do you change AI? You think you're a victim of it, you train it. I tell this to my husband all the time. You're training it to show you those things, you know that. You can train it to do something different. So there are opportunities, especially in the incredible work you're doing, to really bring that up. I think the other thing I would mention and reiterate from what Jan Marie says is I think we have an opportunity now. Public health emerged the concept of health in all policies many, many years ago. And that influenced a lot of spaces where we showed up, where we thought for planning purposes, we need to be talking about the health of having trees or having parks and what that does. And you see it in conversations around housing and all sorts of things. But we need to turn, and I would challenge us all to think of children in all policies. What does that mean? To think of children in all policies, not just how we think about health. There's a movement beginning here in the state of Washington of that dialogue that's based upon some of the work that Jan Marie's talking about and others who are seeing the opportunity and also the need to really shift that. The last thing I'd put out is that our healthcare system is upside down. So we emphasize treating things and giving opportunities to manage chronic diseases and there's lots of great things happening in those spaces. People are living longer, but I just heard from a national leader last week who is looking globally, and even though lifespan is improving, and we could talk about where it is and where it isn't, and is it gender, whatever, but the bottom line she was saying was life expectancy is improving, but the years of healthy life is declining. So our healthcare system in the United States, different from other healthcare systems, it's upside down. We don't emphasize those things that create the environment and the support that will lead to healthy choices. And we try and message it to people. Message fails, but it's the policies, it's the environment that we don't think about. So all those things are opportunities, I think right now, as well as I love the posters back there. I hope you all got a chance to see. There's brilliant things there. And it really shows that you can make a difference no matter where you sit. It doesn't matter. It can be in a workplace. It can be in a certain type of field. It can be at the state level. It can be international. We don't have to feel so overwhelmed that everything has to change all at once. But to allow, as you said, the 20-year span of things slowly moving. I mean, it took 40 years for the Indoor Air Act to reach a place where you can walk into a bar and you're not going to be filled with secondhand smoke. I mean, that took over 40 years here in the state of Washington. So things do move at their own pace, and we have to tolerate it and be ready to support each other as we get frustrated when it doesn't move as fast as we would like.
So many of us in this room, I imagine, might be impatient about that, waiting for 40 years for the change to happen. I know I am. So how do we get through that now? What is it that you see us needing to exercise? I mean, we talk about the need to change, and that there's a lot of things happening around us that are outside of our control. How and what can we take under control so that we actually can exercise our own power, right? I think part of the challenge is that we just sort of give it away, and we just, someone else is going to take care of it. We'll let the legislature pass the laws, and then we'll be good with it. But that isn't good enough, right? So what can we use? How can we, and this is part of the missing part of the puzzle, which is coming back to community. How are we actually partnering in a way that when you think about, and Nora, you're talking about the dichotomy and the polarization, yet most of us think, yes, kids should be vaccinated. How do we get through that? What's it going to take? Who wants to go? Yeah.
Okay, I'll just, I'm not answering the great big question, but little piece. I really think that being rooted in identity is critically important. And we hear that from the youth. In order to, I mean, we have a mental health crisis in this country, substance abuse crisis. I mean, you know, we're dealing with all of these issues that really come back to, do you, on the individual level, how can you maneuver through our world? In order to do that, you have to be rooted and strong and, you know, be comfortable in who you are. We were seeing a lot of work that as a result of working through a pandemic together, that people's hearts and minds opened up to each other in a way that we hadn't experienced as a country before. And that was very impactful. And people really started talking about identity, their identity, group identity, and it was bold and bright and, you know, out in the open, and then things changed. And so I just wanted to bring that out front, because I think it's so important. We hear back from our youth all the time. It's important for them, and it's important for me too, and I'm not a youth, so.
David, you keep asking those questions. That makes me think that, you know, in my work, working across different countries, systems, the mechanisms of exclusion are local to where they're happening, but there is something structurally universal about them. And so whether it is the standards that erase some language, or whether it's the legal system that criminalizes identity, or whether it's the healthcare system that allows behaviors or practices that may or may not be for the benefit of the public good, there's always someone who is left behind, someone who's invisible, there's always clinical consequences, and so then there's the question of, you know, what can we do? But also it makes me reflect to an article that I read not long ago. Well, it was written in 2020 during the pandemic when we were all reading more than the usual. And it says, sometimes silence yells the loudest. And I use that phrase often because silence sometimes is looked at as something negative, but sometimes it also is what we can do. And then if we want to think about all the things, it always makes me, like, we talk about AI, we talk about all these advancements, and I think about, you know, these are systems that we created, and we most probably embedded the bias that we have into them. And so what we can do in this point is the thing that is being fought most, which is representation, diversification, all the things that, however we want to name it, because who has the power? And the person who has, or the people who are at the table who have the power, are those that will design the systems, and it will not be used then as a system, as a tool of surveillance against them. And so for those reasons, what we really can do, yes, we always say go out and vote and make your voices heard and participate and email legislators or your professional organizations and all that. That is all great, but also at a micro level, we could do something. And so we could also teach the next generation for that longevity that we're talking about, is that we need to keep talking about. And also tell, because we get a lot of students as educators, and they want the change to happen yesterday. And it's important to kind of teach our students that advocacy takes time, activism is important, it's frustrating, and it comes at a risk. And what part of life you are in and what risks are you going to take? Because I've learned in my work and across the different stages of life, working against a legal system that criminalized sexual identity and gender identities was, you know, going up against the legal system. And there were risks that I understood and had to come to terms with. Also now, when I was speaking up against, you know, what, or not against, but not in much support of what the professional organizations are coming out with, this could potentially be a professional risk. As an immigrant, I speak every day and I make jokes, which is not funny, but to me, it is my compensating way of like, okay, so today I'm not deported, maybe tomorrow. Or this publication I put out is the one that will give me a knock on the door. These are risks that we take, and some of us may not have that ability or bandwidth to take that risk. And I'm not saying I do have that, but I don't know how I think I do. But, these are things also to think about, but that also says sometimes silence is okay, but sometimes also supporting those doing the work or allowing them to exist is important. So these are things like on a small level we could do that gives us that longevity. And I've heard a lot of people before this have that, like, we need to survive this era. We are in an era where it's difficult. We need to come out with least bruises. And I've been in a small group, we always keep saying, this is a crisis, don't let a good crisis go to waste. Let's learn from it, grow from it, and let us be able to stand up, dust out, and move on.
I guess we're going in order. I love that. That was really incredible. I think I'm going to kind of continue on with that theme. And for me, one of the sort of defining lessons of the last year or year and a half has really been, we're doing it anyway. You look at Minneapolis, you look at communities that have been really under siege this year, and they didn't say, well, let's just put our heads down and wait until this is over. They said, we're gonna figure out what we can do to help each other now, and we're gonna figure it out. We remember COVID as this time of like, everyone was fighting with each other. Oh my God, there were lockdowns. No one trusted public health authorities. But there were also a lot of really amazing things that we were learning about how to be in community together. So many of my students and my neighbors learned mutual aid through their experiences in the pandemic. Many of us learned different ways of being in community and being mutually supportive of our communities together. And so in crisis times, we also learn different ways of being together and supporting each other. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to really double down on that work. And, one of the great things about places like UW-Tacoma and UW-Bothell is we've been doing this community embedded work for so long. This is our bread and butter. And I think we got to start really turning to institutions like local health departments, but also places like UW-Tacoma that know how to do this work, do it day in and day out, and really continue investing in it. I guess the last thing I'm thinking about a lot is that things are moving at different paces, at different scales right now. I teach a health policy class in which my students engage very deeply with the state legislature, and it's really pretty disorienting right now to watch what's happening in the state legislature versus what's happening in Washington, D.C., but that can also be to our advantage. We are lucky enough to live in a state where we still see a lot of movement. We see a lot of cross-party work going on. We see a lot of things moving forward, even in budget crisis, even in really hard times. The work is getting done, and I think we got to focus our efforts at those scales, at those places where the pace of work feels like it's still moving forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that there is a lot that happens locally, and you have the opportunity to find those spaces that give you an opportunity to help and be an ally or a co-conspirator within a movement. And a lot of it right now is very, very local, very neighborhoody, and people need to just step into those spaces. And then there's the opportunity you have to take if you're given it. For me, being the chair of the State Board of Health, we're the regulatory body who decides what the mandated school entry vaccines are. And there was a meeting where there were 13,000 comments about what we should be doing, and lots of people showing up. And you just have to rally at those times too, to look at the science. One of the things that encourages me right now, and I saw it in the word cloud, was science, because we have an international cadre of scientists that are continuing to do the work. It's happening at the university level. So that gives me hope in that, and how to support that moving forward. So there's little places everywhere.
I appreciate that, and I'm going to kind of bring this portion to a close, and we're going to have a little pause break, but then we have a question for you all to talk amongst yourselves. But the sense of identity and knowing when and how you are comfortable with taking risk, right? But then relying on others around you, because it can seem really big. There's this macrocosm of stuff, and as you just said, outside of the US, the good work is still happening. So how do we draw on the strength where we see it, and then how do we engage with that in a way that makes sense for us, right? And how are we engaging with the community and their own leadership to support not only us, but them? And that there are leaders among all of you, and thinking about how it is that you can then take, again, with your own sense of risk, right? I mean, it's not, for those of us who are following the stock market, right? We all talk about financial risk, but there is this risk of advocacy and agency, and how is it that we are looking toward what is the greater good, and where are we on that spectrum? So we're going to sort of pause there. We're going to give you about 5 minutes to get something to drink, but then I'm going to ask you to come back to your tables because we have a question to pose to you.
You know, as you were saying, I have here in my notes, and I keep quotes in my notes, and and to quote John Lewis a little bit, do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. So we're in this journey for a while.
Great. Yes, please.
I think it's important for us not to forget. And there's something that that I talk about a lot is the 7-generation principle, and that is to be thinking about where we are currently and looking back to the experiences of our parents, our grandparents, and our great-grandparents, and bring that wisdom forward to connect to those stories and those understandings and think about the benefit of the future for our children, think forward, and make certain that we're communicating forward. It felt like at some point that in response to so many things coming at us that we were, I saw it a lot, that we're reacting in a way that is like in the moment, rather thinking about all of the rich understanding and learnings that we had if we just took the time to make certain that we have the right people, that we're centered together, and looking at that history. So,
Thank you. So we want to have you part of this conversation and to think about what you've just heard from our panelists and their words of wisdom. So we're going to have a question for you to think about and to talk amongst yourselves. There's a lot of factors in the system, but one of them that's really like in front of us right now is this thing that we're calling AI, which isn't just Chat GPT, although I will say that I have come to be somewhat of a convert for academic reasons, not necessarily publishing, but to help me in my work. But technology and AI is out there, and it's impacting us, right? It's embedded in our healthcare systems, and the way we access our own health information, and how we might even be using it to make our own health decisions. So this question for you to think about is, as we think about the use of technology and AI and how it is increasingly a part of what we do and how we do our work, how we engage, how is this shaping the way in which we access the information and generate information and get it out there and share it? How can we use these as tools to genuinely improve health? And this sort of plays off a little bit what Nora was saying at the end about it's out there, but for what purpose, right? And if we're really serious about thinking about how are we going to improve, how do we use it as a tool and not necessarily as a replacement for the work? And then how do we do so in ways that strengthen and create trust and human connection? And I think we all learned that during the pandemic, and certainly as educators, when we had a shift I'm going to say week 9 of the quarter to use Zoom. But that shift, that rapid shift in the use of technology made us do things we didn't think we would have to do. But it also had its impact on us in terms of creating or maintaining community. And that still is actually part of the challenge, right? So how is it we can think about the use of technology? How can we actually use it as a tool to strengthen the way in which we engage with each other and connect, rather than maybe unintentionally creating the distance and the disconnection, or exacerbating the disconnection that may already exist? So that's kind of a meaty question, but we'd like you to really have that conversation with each other for the next probably 15 minutes. And then we're going to come back and love to hear some of your thoughts, but then also have you a chance to be able to ask questions of our panelists. Okay? So go to it. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to kind of bring you back to the front and ask our panelists to come back up to the stage. So first, just a few, reflections from you all. What kind of came to your mind as you're thinking about this? What kind of reflections did you have about this particular question, this consideration?
Thank you. So I think we start off talking this conversation a lot about sharing our personal experiences with technology, and we especially focused on AI just because it's such like a hot topic. And in terms of like tools to genuinely improve health, we didn't come up with ideas that we're going to, trademark and create a new program, but I think we talked a lot about understanding how AI and technology really, in order to improve health outcomes, has to be utilized and viewed as a support rather than a creator of solutions. I touched a lot on, as a young person, people are always like, oh yeah, you love AI. And I'm actually, out of the people at the table, and I think of a lot of people, I'm actually quite not a fan of AI specifically. Someone who has grown up with technology, to see AI being viewed and used as a creator rather than a supporter is really alarming to me. And I think something we talked about is understanding its limitations. How do we have that human experience and human perspective evaluate both input into these technology and AI and also the output of what it is saying is the solution? And then in terms of ways to strengthen trust and human connection, it has to really come down to how are the people who are being affected by this technology and AI perceiving it? Whether that be when it comes to like, Rebecca and I talked a lot about like, we really don't trust like AI generated images and videos. They feel inauthentic and they're very easily perceived as wrong. And Jingyi talked about like seeing how her students are utilizing AI and about how there's worries about how is that taking away from opportunities for authentic like self-learning and thought. When it comes to creating distance or disconnection, I think it has a lot to do with understanding how we can make sure humans stay at the core of caring about what is the result of these increasingly embedded tools.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Who else? Anybody else? Don't be shy. Yeah.
I don't know if it's a general consensus or not. I think it is. I think nursing needs to be involved with the creation of any AI and evaluation of the AI. Because I know for many, many reasons, it may interpret whatever, but you need that human touch, you need that care and compassion. You need somebody to kind of make sure things are going in the right direction. Because how often are patients misled or misdiagnosed? So we need nursing input. We need to be driving this train, people, to make sure it gets to the station.
Thank you. Yeah, who else? Up here in the, Tim up at the front here? Or Wei Chao? Thanks.
Oh, thank you. So we came up with technology in general as a means of rapid response to threats. An example was communities in Africa that were able to leverage technology to rapidly identify wildlife poaching risks and bring people to justice who have been engaged in harming wildlife. It's not hard to imagine, by extension, that being used to protect communities against those who wish to harm humans. AI can be a powerful tool for collaboration, depending partly on who owns the tool and what are that person's motivations or that institution's motivations. Technology and AI can radically open up access to shared and often very specialized knowledge. Examples include Wikipedia and also include the free or very low-cost online coursework. Technology and AI can help us in finding others who are like us in some uncommon characteristic that needs support, and particularly people who are sexual and gender minorities or questioning. Often that support is a matter of life and death. So we came up with several examples, and I think trying to extend that and generalize it, I would say that a crucial component is who owns and controls the AI and for what purpose. And also, who curates the knowledge base that AI is using. So I think we identified some threats, and we kept going back to, and this is what I don't like about this change, but we identified the change as not without opportunities either.
Great, yeah. Other thoughts, comments? Okay. So I'd like to open it up also for questions to our panel, and any questions that came up for you as they were sharing with us their knowledge, their expertise. Anything that sort of strike you that you were like, Vanessa, I called her by name.
Thank you so much. Something that has come up to me as we were having this conversation at our table is around digital literacy. So we make a lot of assumptions about being on like the same page, and that folks have like a shared knowledge and understanding, even with the definition of artificial intelligence, and like what does that actually mean. And so one of the things that we chatted about at our table was about like taking phones away in schools. And I think back to when I was in nursing school, and they didn't want us to have calculators. They wanted us to do everything by hand. And I think about the medication errors and all the challenges that presented, right? And so I'm wondering from the panel, like, how do we, instead of using antiquated approaches about taking things away, how do we empower academic and educational environments to be innovative and creative and engaging so that the students don't want to have their phones, and when they do, they use it in such a way that it's a tool for success instead of failure?
Who wants to take that first? The leading question.
So, thank you, Vanessa. Well, you are right. I mean, your calculator example is the same example I gave at the table I was sitting at when we were having the conversation. And I guess some of us who were in that era that, calculators were fought, look at us now, look at all the good, but also we could challenge a lot of things. And I think I'll go back to the child vaccination example that you were saying, like there's sometimes a small percentage of people fighting it and we spend more effort there. I don't know the percentages of people fighting the existence of AI, but it is here to stay, and it's doing things that maybe 10 or 20 years ago we didn't find imaginable. And it's a lot of good things. Now, does it come at a cost? Yes. And I think the hard part is change, and it is different. So we teach our classes differently. Like in education, I'm going to talk about it as an educator, like we cannot no longer be holding information and knowledge to our students. Information and knowledge is readily available. Maybe 10, 20 years ago, and some of us when we went to school, education and knowledge was what the faculty gave. But now there's a lot of very high production YouTube videos that are better than any faculty could perform in a short period of time with animation. There's a lot of things that could give the students information. We need to think differently. Now, some of us do not have either the bandwidth or the knowledge because we didn't learn that way and we weren't trained that way. So I think if we start thinking and asking questions, because I sit in a lot of groups and task forces thinking, should we allow students to use AI, yes or no? And I think I've seen the question evolve into how can we embed AI ethically and what does that look like or mean? And what do we mean by ethically? But also, are we designing our courses? Are we designing our conversations? Are we teaching people how to use that technology? Because it's a tool, like it was said earlier, and it is here to stay. But also, like we were saying, it also is, like with calculators, they used to always tell us garbage in, garbage out. They also, in grad school, when we started using statistical tools, they used to tell us garbage in, garbage out. So what we put in it is what will come out of it. So learning how to put prompts that forces the system to be inclusive. Learning how to not rely on that output, like being somewhere where it says, well, I put this in this AI, and it gave me this, so you all should use this as this is the example of, like AI gave me an answer that I'm gonna give it to you, without critically looking at it and thinking about what it could be. So I think that we could change how we're looking at it, and it will be a process and it will take time, and some people will just not like AI, and it's okay. And some faculty may not use it in their classrooms, but we need to think about it for us as faculty, and we had clinicians at the table here, is that they're working and they're using AI. So if we're not preparing our graduates to work in the industry that actually uses AI and how to use it and how to question its output and its use and how to input it with less bias, then we're just not graduating people who could be at the table and who could be part of the decisions, or maybe also being part of, like if we tell them AI is not okay, then they're not gonna be part of making decisions about AI and programming AI, but also we're embedding this discrimination against those who use AI, like as if we're teaching them, we're in a position of power, we're teaching them that AI is not a good thing, and so all those who use AI are gonna be bad. And so like we're creating a conversation that could be directed differently.
Which goes to polarization.
Yeah. I'm not going to talk about polarization. I'm going to talk about, I think there's a central theme to a lot of these comments and questions, and that is the question of agency, which is like one of the themes of our symposium today. And so for me, the real question is who holds the agency here? In a lot of cases, when I hear people talk about AI, they actually cede their agency to the machine. If you can hear this in the way that people talk about AI. AI wrote that for me. AI told me to do this, right? So that is one of my concerns. But I think as with lots of other determinants of our health, we should be thinking about digital determinants of our health, not as one bad thing or a set of bad things, but as a complex mix of both good and bad things, that it depends on how we use them, how we wield them, who owns them. So I always think about this. There was a National Academies of Medicine report on youth and social media, which gets back to Vanessa's question about schools and phones. And in that report, after reviewing the literature, they said that it was nearly impossible to tease out the impact that phones had on youth social media because they compared it. They compared it to as if everyone were smoking and everyone was smoking something different. And what they meant by that was that there's really no one who isn't using a lot of these technologies, who isn't exposed in some way to social media, but also the way that we use these things differs wildly from person to person. The kinds of worlds that they open up for us is very different from person to person. So how do we actually study that? How do we think about that? How do we legislate that? For me, one of the important considerations is not just how am I using this thing, but who owns this thing and what are their intentions? And I think if you look at the large corporations that own the vast majority of AI that people are being encouraged to use right now, those corporations do not necessarily have good intentions. And so I think that should enter into our calculation of how we use this and how we set up community values and guidelines and guardrails around this. I think that if a tech CEO or industry leader says something like, we're going to move fast and break things, or I don't let my own children use the product that I developed, or as Sam Altman has said, I made a product and it might kill us all. I think we should take them seriously when they say those things. And they also are going to tell us that their products can cure cancer, right? And so if we're going to believe the cure cancer line, I think we also have to believe what they're telling us very publicly and openly about the potential harms of their technologies, and I think we should regulate accordingly. We largely failed to regulate social media. We largely failed to get ahead of it as health fields. I don't think it's too late for AI. And I think that we're taking a lot of lessons from social media and applying those to AI. But we have to use what we in the kind of public health policy fields call like anticipatory governance. We gotta govern ahead of where it is now and to where these leaders are telling us it's gonna be tomorrow and next year and 7 generations from now.
Thank you. Well, I know there's 2 hands, maybe very quickly because we're at 5 o'clock, but is there something?
Thank you. I really, what you just said really resonated with me, and how there's no disinterested parties involved in this conversation, but there's this overwhelming sense of majority. This is the way we have to go. We have to go AI, but there's huge, huge financial profitability involved, which makes me suspect. Like I kept saying around this table, I'm not a Luddite, I'm really not. But I think about this and I think, what is the problem that AI is solving? And is it the only solution? And we have so many other problems with our healthcare system, like lack of enough nurses, for example. What if we took some of that money that's going into AI and started really looking at our workforce needs and shoring those up? I mean, we're this developed country that has no workforce development plan in terms of analyzing what the needs of the population are. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thanks. I know there was one last hand back there. Cameron.
Hi, I don't know if this is going to be a quick question, easy to answer. So Jan Marie spoke that health includes land and community. So what are your thoughts on using and continuing to develop AI in health when its data centers actively cause harm to communities with water usage and pollution? To the entire panel, I guess.
I would ask you to repeat your question because I didn't hear all of it.
Oh, sorry. Yes, okay. So what are your thoughts on using and continuing to develop AI in health when its data centers actively cause harm to communities with its high water usage and noise pollution?
I think that's actually the point that I would have added to this conversation. And not for me to answer that question, but to just make certain that that's part of the discussion, because I know that there's a lot of concerns from a tribal perspective about the water issue, the high usage of water, when we already know that, you know, we have a problem with having clean water, and it's critical to our lives. So I think that's an important question.
I would really agree that it's something that needs to be wrestled with, absolutely, because there's implications, because it's part of what we don't know. Science is not at a point where we actually have broad knowledge on what are implications. And the community assets versus the community burden needs to be developed. That's what planning is supposed to be doing. And I think that I'm going to deviate off of AI just a sec. It's not the only place where public health is at risk right now. I mean, sitting at the balcony where I sit, where we regulate the water systems in the state of Washington, we're watching the effects of climate change, of heat domes, of lots of stuff going on. These are areas where, unless you touch it in some way because you're an activist or you're involved, you're generally, the population makes a lot of assumptions that the water's going to be safe, that we are going to be okay, that the kids, when they go to school, I doubt anybody in this room, because Lauren Jenks has left, knows that the environmental health and safety rules that your schools for your kids are functioning under, they're over 50 years old, and the legislature has been blocking us from updating them. And it affects everything from what your children experience in terms of heat issues within the schools, the radon that they may be exposed to. So my point is not to be a Debbie Downer here, but but it's just that these are one of a lot of things that you have the opportunity to be involved with groups that are thinking about these things potentially, or community pivoting for community empowerment as we're talking about it. And we need to find our spot in there, and because this can be very overwhelming.
And I want to just go back to AI again, and
Please,
then
thank
just
you.
really emphasize that it is important that we get ahead of it, because it is happening now. Our kids are using it. You know, obviously, I've heard today that, you know, it is used in the academic setting. I was at a conference in San Diego earlier this year, and there was a futurist that was talking about AI, and he was talking about it from an academic perspective, but also, and he wasn't saying it was good or it was bad, he was just talking about where it is, and I was blown away, right? And what was clear is that we need to get in front of it so that we are finding where we need to regulate it so it doesn't go out of control. I heard a speaker last night that was talking about China's way ahead of us on this. So that's another external threat, you know, something to think about in, you know, what we're doing with it. I don't have any answers, but certainly it just seems like everyone's attention should be on this right now.
So I do want to end on a positive note, and this is back to the panel, which is what gives you hope about our health system that can really transform it to become more just, and what is it going to what can we do to make that happen?
Well, I'll start. What gives me hope is just science and being in space like this and talking with you all and the student and faculty posters, all of those things, the great thinking gives me hope. And also, I really want to go back to your point about so much is shoved at us that it sounds like it's everybody that feels a certain way, when we really need to be grounded in that that may not be the truth. So I want a groupie follow you in your research, because that gives me hope too.
Thanks, that's really kind. I think, again, spaces like this one give me a ton of hope as well. The opportunity to sit down and have real conversations and struggle through these questions together and hear the different perspectives. I think all of that is so important. I also try and hold on to the idea that as much as my fellow humans can sort of frustrate me or disappoint me with their choices, they also hold equal amounts the capacity for change and learning. And I really try and hold on to that idea right now, because sometimes it feels like we're so locked in that people aren't willing to change, but people are changing and learning, and I think are going to surprise us with their capacity for that moving into the future. I want to give a shout out to Mariam Kaba's words about hope being a discipline, that it's actually work we have to do every day, and we have to do it together. We have to do it in community. I think also a discipline is to think pragmatically and realistically about the alternatives to our current state of events. Margaret Thatcher had this nickname when she was prime minister in the UK and driving everyone crazy with her neoliberal ideas. And people nicknamed her Tina because she said, there is no alternative so often. And I think we are often led to believe that there's no alternative, and part of our job is to constantly think that there is an alternative and explore it and creatively play with it. And I think that's a lot of what we've been doing here today. And then finally, we have so many good models for what health justice looks like in communities through history, through our own neighborhoods and environments right now. Like, we have all the answers in front of us. We literally have to choose to just invest in them and support them and lift them up. So that is my continual source of hope.
Well, I believe in transformation. I mean, I started by saying that, yes, it took 20 plus years for things to move, but they do move. And I mean, if we think of transformation, not with the capital T, where we have, big task forces or big think tanks, but things that we could do on the everyday and that would add up over time. And I see, like, in our healthcare profession, and nurses specifically, like, the relational is not going away. The nurses are at the bedside. Even with AI, we're still talking to patients, holding their hands. And I heard, earlier a nurse saying, I want AI to help me do less charting or more efficient charting and more time with my patient. So that is hope for me. That is hope that we are still not losing the relational. Also, that whole idea of, also there were talks today throughout the day and thereafter, is that we must not lose the naming. Like, we should continue to talk about health disparities and what causes them, and some of the questions about, okay, so now we have AI and technology, what is that costing us in terms of, what is it at the cost of what, and who is not there? And then we must not lose each other. And so gatherings like this today helps us keep having the conversation. But also, I would say, what gives me hope is that when more people ask, we are here at the table, who is not here? And so are we inclusive of everybody? Because as it was said before, if we're not here, then we're not able to provide that representation, to be able to provide different perspectives. And so, caring cannot be neutral. We all don't know everything. And so, yes, we can't have a team of millions of people, but, representation matters. And how can we stay rooted with our communities to work with them, not, about them, and, make people feel that they belong, because that could also be healing. And that gives us the courage to keep showing up, and bearing witness to what's happening, and not accepting that this is the status quo, this is what we have to do, but asking, like you were saying, Nora, how can we get to the goal that we want to get, staying true to who we are? And so, that's, I think, the most radical way of being hopeful.
What gives me hope is listening to the voices of community. What gives me hope is hearing what's important to our youth. What gives me hope is hearing my granddaughter's laugh and know that she is all in it. She is in her life, dug in, has attitude, and, can see herself, like how she's gonna be already. She's 6. And some people that know me in the room, I always tell a story about my granddaughter, but that gives me a lot of hope. It also gives me hope that when it wasn't that long ago that there were leaders, health leaders from around the state, and we were in a room talking about what do our children need to thrive. And I was talking about historical trauma, and the room went dead silent. There were about, 60 people there, dead silent. No one said a word. Until one of the leaders changed the subject, went on to talk about something else. It wasn't that long ago. And now there's that language that was passed in legislation in 2019, and people are using that language. And most people know what we're talking about when we talk about historical trauma. It gives me hope that there was legislation that said nothing about us without us, that dictates that state agencies have to involve community in their decision-making structure. And so that's that effort around potential for a lot more power sharing. It gives me hope that the Department of Health built community partners that was over 600 people that jumped on calls and was part of an organization during the effects of COVID-19. And then that group has continued to meet. That group has continued to influence the Department of Health. So all of those things give me hope. Certainly having opportunities like this is wonderful. And also hearing from people and learning about what other people are thinking about issues like AI and then where we've been in terms of comfort with addressing health disparities, understanding different identities that have been excluded over time, and knowing that that's not going to go away. Those things have been aired and they're here to stay. That gives me hope.
So I just want to thank you all for being a part of this conversation. This is what gives me hope, right? That you all are willing to take part of a day and just to be in community, and that's what this was intended, to create a space for that. Just to kind of bring a few things that I thought were really salient to what I heard you all talk about, and I think just hearing the comments about, and it's interesting, I was writing down while you were talking about things that were really important as we're talking about the sense of how do we keep moving forward, and Nora, you said this about being values driven, right? We have to take stock in our values, not just individually, but collectively, and how is that also driving the conversation about what is important? And that conversation has to be with the community. And understanding the knowledge is there, we just have to resurface it. It doesn't have to be regenerated, it's there. But we also have to be responsible in how we understand it, how we share it, how we use it. And this is my quality improvement hat, that some of you have heard it, but every system is designed to get the results it gets. Perfectly designed to get the results it gets. So if we're going to center ourselves and humanity in the care of each other, then we have to be at the center of that and design it. And to the point that whatever technology that we have is a tool, it is not a replacement. It is not a substitute for the human touch, for the human experience, for the human voice, and the human compassion, which was one of the points of hope, right? So as you leave today and talk amongst yourselves, to think about how and where do you put yourself in this space? How do you engage in your own agency? What are the choices that you're willing to take and the risks? And how do you rely on others to do that with you in community? So thank you again for being here today. Join me in thanking our panelists and yourselves. So please have some drink and some food and conversation again. Thank you.